On his 18th birthday, a boy who'd spent a decade in the system inherited a worthless salvage yard from the grandfather he barely knew. His stepmother told him to sell it for scrap, but what he discovered buried in the rust and ruin would change not only his future, but the entire story of his past. And if you've ever felt like you were given nothing, like you were starting from a place of loss, I need you to listen to this. Hit that subscribe button, because this is a story about how the things we think are worthless can sometimes hold everything we need. The door to the Northgate Youth Residence clicked shut behind me with a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. It was a heavy, metallic thud, a sound that meant someone was leaving for good, or someone was locked in for the night. For the last 6 years, it had always been the latter. Today, it was the former. My entire life was packed into a single black duffel bag slung over my shoulder, and it wasn't even full. A few pairs of jeans, some shirts that were starting to get too small, a worn paperback, and a toothbrush. 18 years old, and my worldly possessions felt like a joke with no punchline. The air outside was cold, sharp with the promise of a late autumn rain, and it smelled like freedom. Or maybe just exhaust fumes from the city bus pulling up to the curb. It was hard to tell the difference. Mr. Henderson, my case manager for the final 2 years, stood on the steps, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tired tweed jacket. He had that look he always got when one of us aged out, a mixture of strained optimism and profound weariness. "Bus pass is in the envelope, Leo," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Along with the cash for the week, and the address for the shelter. You check in before 9. I nodded, the strap of the duffel bag digging into my shoulder. I didn't look at him. I looked at the cracks in the pavement, a web of gray lines spreading out from the bottom step. I'd spent hours staring at those same cracks from the window of the common room. They were more familiar to me than my own reflection. "You call me if you need anything," he added. It was what he said to everyone. It was a kind lie, and we both knew it. His job was to get me to this door. Once I walked through it, I was just another file in a cabinet, another statistic he'd have to report at the end of the quarter. "I'll be fine," I said. The words tasted like dust. He sighed, a little puff of white in the cold air. "Your stepmother called this morning. Karen." The name landed like a stone in my gut. I hadn't heard from her in almost 10 years, not since the day she dropped me at the county services building with a half-empty suitcase and a story about how she just couldn't handle me anymore. I was 8. My dad had been gone for 6 months, and his new wife had decided I was no longer part of the deal. "What did she want?" I asked, my voice flat. "It's about your grandfather." "Your dad's father, Arthur. He passed away a few weeks ago." I felt nothing. A vague flicker of something, maybe, but it was like trying to remember a dream. Arthur. I had a single memory of him, a big man with hands stained black with grease, smelling of gasoline and pipe tobacco. He'd lifted me up to see the engine of a car once, a long, long time ago. His workshop had been a cavern of shadows and gleaming metal. Then my dad had met Karen, and we'd moved away. And that was it. "Okay," I said. Mr. Henderson shifted his weight. This was the uncomfortable part, the part that wasn't in his manual. "She said he left you something in his will. She said it wasn't much. A piece of property out in Westfall County." He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "She said it's just an old salvage yard, full of junk. Her advice was to sell it to the scrapyard, take whatever you can get." She forwarded the lawyer's contact info. He handed me the paper. The lawyer's name, Ms. Albright, was printed neatly below a phone number. Below that, an address. 1415 Rustwater Road, Pine Creek. I'd never even heard of Pine Creek. "A salvage yard," I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "She said it's worthless," he he confirmed, his eyes full of something like pity. Said the back taxes are probably more than the land is worth. But it's yours, legally, as of today. He clapped me on the shoulder, a clumsy, awkward gesture. Happy birthday, Leo. The bus hissed, its doors folding open. I took the crumpled paper and shoved it into my pocket, the sharp corners of the fold pressing against my thigh. I didn't say goodbye. I just turned and climbed the steps of the bus, the duffel bag bumping against the seats. As the bus pulled away from the curb, I looked back one last time. Northgate was a square brick building with barred windows on the ground floor. It looked less like a home and more like a place to store things you didn't want to look at. Mr. Henderson was already walking back inside, the heavy door closing him off from the world, from me. The click was fainter from this distance, but I still heard it. I was out, and I had inherited a pile of junk in a town I'd never heard of. It wasn't much of a start, but it was a start, and it was mine. The bus ride was 3 hours of gray highway and dying fields. I sat with my forehead pressed against the cool glass, watching the city bleed away into suburbs, then into sprawling farmland, and finally into the dense, dark woods of the state's forgotten corners. The envelope from Mr. Henderson sat heavy in my lap. Inside was $200 in 20s, a week-long bus pass, and the address of a men's shelter in a part of the city I tried to avoid. That was the official plan. Find a bed, find a job washing dishes, and try not to become one of the ghosts who haunted the downtown sidewalks. The unofficial plan was now a crumpled piece of paper in my pocket. 1415 Rustwater Road, a salvage yard, my grandfather's. It felt unreal, like a detail from someone else's life. Karen's voice echoed in my head, filtered through Mr. Henderson's tired retelling. Worthless. Sell it for scrap. Why even call? After 10 years of silence, why bother to pass on the news of a worthless inheritance? Was it a final, parting jab? A way to remind me that I came from nothing and would end up with nothing. I pulled out the paper and my cheap, prepaid phone. I had enough credit for a few calls. My fingers felt clumsy as I dialed the number for the lawyer, Ms. Albright. It rang 3 times, then a crisp, professional voice answered. Albright and Sons, this is Janice. Hello, I said, my own voice sounding thin. I'm trying to reach Ms. Albright. My name is Leo Vance. There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. Regarding the estate of Arthur Vance? Yes, I said, surprised she knew. Ms. Albright is in court this morning, but she left instructions. We've been trying to reach your guardian. I don't have one anymore, I said. I'm 18. Today. Oh. Another pause. The woman's voice softened slightly. Well, happy birthday. Miss Albright said to inform you that the deed to the property in Pine Creek has been filed in your name. It's a 2-acre parcel zoned for commercial salvage. There are outstanding property taxes. How much? I asked, bracing myself. Approximately $3,400, covering the last 2 years. The county will likely move to seize the property and auction it off within the next 90 days if they aren't paid. $3,400. She might as well have said $1 million. The 200 in my lap felt like pocket change. My stepmother said I should sell it. That is an option, the receptionist, Janice, said carefully. There is a standing offer from a developer, Red Oak Holdings. They've been trying to acquire the parcels along that road for a new commercial development. Their offer is $10,000 for the land, as is. $10,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering. It was more money than I'd ever seen. It was a security deposit on an apartment. It was a used car. It was a buffer against the world, a chance to not end up in a shelter on my first night of freedom. It was a lifeline. They'll take it with the tax debt? Yes, they would clear the lien as part of the sale. You would walk away with approximately $6,600. The number was smaller, but still immense. A fortune. Why did my stepmother say it was worthless? I asked. I can't speak to that, Janice said, her professional tone snapping back into place. Ms. Albright's note just says the offer is on the table. If you want to accept it, you can come into the office to sign the paperwork. We would need your new address to mail the check. I looked out the window. The trees were getting thicker, the houses farther apart. We were entering a different world, one of hills and winding roads. Where is your office? We're in the county seat, about 30 minutes from Pine Creek. But the property itself, I have the keys here if you want them. The keys to the gate and the small office trailer on the lot. The keys. The thought of holding them, of having a key to a place that was mine, sent a strange jolt through me. Even if it was just a gate to a field of junk. I want the keys, I said, the decision making itself. I want to see it first. Very well, she said. I'll leave them in an envelope with the front desk. We're open until 5. I thanked her and hung up. The bus was beginning its slow descent into a small valley. A sign flickered past. Welcome to Pine Creek. Population 742. The town was a single main street, a collection of tired-looking storefronts, a gas station, and a diner with a buzzing neon sign that read, Eat. It looked like a place time had forgotten to update. I pulled the cord for the stop and the bus sighed to a halt in front of the diner. When I stepped off, the silence was the first thing I noticed. After years of the constant noise of the city, the low hum of the group home, the quiet here was a physical presence. It was filled with the rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. It was unnerving. I had about 4 hours until the lawyer's office closed. Rustwater Road was, according to the map on my phone, about a 2-mile walk from the center of this tiny town. I adjusted the duffel bag on my shoulder and started walking. I was going to see my inheritance. I was going to look at my $10,000 of rust and ruin before I signed it away. The walk to Rustwater Road was a journey into decay. The pavement of Main Street gave way to cracked asphalt, which then crumbled into a gravel road that wound its way out of the small cluster of houses and into the woods. The trees hung low over the road, their branches bare and skeletal against the bruised purple sky. The air grew colder, thick with the damp, earthy smell of fallen leaves. After a mile, the gravel turned to dirt. This was Rustwater Road. It wasn't so much a road as a suggestion, 2 muddy ruts carved through the forest. My sneakers, already worn, were quickly coated in a thick reddish mud. I passed a mailbox that was leaning over, half swallowed by weeds, its door hanging open like a mouth frozen mid-sentence. Then another, this one peppered with what looked like buckshot holes. This was a place people came to be left alone. My phone had lost its signal a half-mile back. I was completely on my own. The duffel bag felt heavier with every step. The $200 in my pocket felt smaller. The idea of the shelter back in the city, as grim as it was, at least felt certain. This felt like walking off the edge of the map. Finally, I saw it. A chain-link fence at least 10 feet high, topped with loops of barbed wire that were rusted the color of dried blood. It stretched between the trees, disappearing into the woods on either side. In the center was a wide gate, secured with a heavy chain and a padlock that looked as old and weathered as the trees around it. A faded, hand-painted sign was wired to the fence. It read, Vance & Son, Salvage. The & Son was painted in a different, less steady hand. My father. This was it, my inheritance. Through the diamond-shaped links of the fence, I could see what Karen had meant. It was a graveyard of machines. Cars, trucks, and tractors were arranged in long, crooked rows, their bodies slowly dissolving back into the earth. Some were just skeletal frames, picked clean of their parts. Others were more intact, their paint faded to a chalky pastel, their windows shattered. Weeds grew up through engine bays, and small trees had taken root in the beds of pickup trucks. A small, faded blue trailer sat near the gate, its windows dark and grimy. It looked like it had been dropped there decades ago and forgotten. It was overwhelming. The scale of the decay was immense. It wasn't just a pile of junk. It was a monument to abandonment. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. This was my grandfather's life's work. This was my father's legacy. And it had all been left to rot. I thought of the $10,000, the $6,600 after taxes. It was a clean break. Sign a paper, take the money, and never have to think about this place, or the grandfather I never knew, or the father I barely remembered, ever again. I could walk back to town, call the lawyer, and tell her I'd be there in the morning. I could catch the first bus back to the city and start my new, untethered life with a small fortune in my pocket. It was the smart thing to do. It was the sane thing to do. But I had walked 2 miles through the mud to get here, and Janice at the lawyer's office had said she had the keys. I turned my back on the gate and started the long walk back to town. I didn't know why, but I knew I wasn't ready to let go yet. I had to get inside. I had to stand in the middle of all that ruin and feel what it felt like to own something, even if it was worthless. I had to unlock the gate. Back in town, the neon sign of the diner cast a warm, pinkish glow onto the wet pavement. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten since the dry toast and weak coffee at Northgate that morning. I had $200. I could afford a meal. I pushed open the door and a little bell chimed. The place was small and warm, smelling of coffee and fried onions. A handful of men in work boots and flannel shirts sat at the counter, nursing mugs of coffee. A woman with a tired but kind face stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a cloth. She looked up as I came in, her eyes taking in my muddy shoes and my city clothes. "Just you, hun?" she asked. I nodded, sliding onto a stool at the far end of the counter. "Coffee," I said, "and a menu." She poured me a mug of black coffee that was thick and strong. It warmed my hands. I ordered a burger and fries, and while I waited, I called a local cab company, the number written on a fly-specked business card pinned to a corkboard by the door. I needed to get to the county seat before 5. The food was hot and real, the best I'd eaten in years. I ate slowly, making it last. The warmth spread through me, chasing away some of the chill from the woods. For a few minutes, sitting in that diner, I almost felt normal, like a regular person stopping for a meal, not a ghost haunting the edges of his own life. The cab arrived, an old sedan that rattled as it idled. The driver was a man who looked to be about the same age as my grandfather might have been. He didn't say much as we drove, just grunted when I gave him the address. The 30-minute drive took us through more rolling hills, past farms with big, sturdy barns and fields that were turning brown for the winter. The county seat was a bigger town, with a proper town square and a courthouse made of pale gray stone. The law office was across the street. I paid the driver, telling him to wait. I walked in and gave my name to the same receptionist, Janice. She smiled, a little less guarded in person, and handed me a thick manila envelope. "The keys are in there," she said, along with a copy of the deed and the tax notice. "And this." She handed me a separate, smaller business card. "Red Oak Holdings. That's Mr. Davies. He's the one handling the acquisition. He said to call him directly when you've made a decision." I took the card. The name felt heavy, like another link in a chain I didn't understand. I thanked her and walked back out into the fading light. Back in the cab, I opened the manila envelope. Inside, nestled in a small plastic bag, were two keys on a simple metal ring. One was a standard house key, small and brass. The other was thick and heavy, an industrial-looking thing made of steel. The key to the gate. I held them in my palm. They were cold and solid. They were real. They were mine. The drive back to Rustwater Road was silent. The sun was setting, and long, deep shadows stretched across the road. When the cab pulled up to the gate, the salvage yard looked even more menacing in the twilight. The rows of dead cars looked like sleeping iron beasts. "This is it?" the driver asked, looking through the fence with a doubtful expression. "This is it," I said. I paid him the rest of the fare, leaving myself with just under $100. I told him I wouldn't need a ride back. He shrugged, as if he was used to people making strange decisions out here, and drove away, his red taillights disappearing into the gloom. The silence that descended was absolute. It was just me, the fence, and a world of rust. I walked to the gate, the big steel key in my hand. It slid into the heavy padlock. It was stiff, and I had to jiggle it, putting my shoulder into it. For a second, I thought it wouldn't work, that this was the final joke, a key that didn't fit. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the lock clicked open. The sound was as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. I unwound the heavy chain, my hands getting coated in a film of rust and grime. The gate was heavy. I had to lean my entire body into it, and it scraped open over the muddy ground, just wide enough for me to slip through. I was in. I stood for a moment, just inside the fence, and breathed. The air smelled of damp earth, oil, and decay. It wasn't a pleasant smell, but it was the smell of my property. My worthless, beautiful, terrible property. My first act as a man of property was to close and lock the gate behind me. From the inside, the world inside the fence was a labyrinth of metal and memory. As dusk settled, the salvage yard became a place of deep shadows and strange silhouettes. The cars were hulking, dark shapes, their broken windows like vacant eyes. The wind whispered through their hollowed-out frames, creating a low, mournful whistle. It should have been terrifying. After a life spent in the fluorescent-lit, always monitored confines of institutions, this wild, dark, and utterly private space should have sent me running. Instead, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in my life, there were no cameras, no supervisors, no one watching. The only eyes on me belonged to the ghosts of these dead machines. My first destination was the trailer. It sat on cinder blocks, its blue paint peeling in long strips. A single wooden step, sagging in the middle, led up to the door. I tried the handle. Locked. I pulled out the keyring. The small brass key slid into the lock easily. With a turn, the knob clicked, and the door creaked open. A wave of stale, musty air washed over me. The smell of a place that had been sealed for a long time. The smell of dust and old paper and something else. Something faintly metallic and oily. I fumbled for a light switch just inside the door, not expecting it to work. I flicked it up and down. Nothing. Of course not. The power had likely been cut off years ago. My phone was useless as a light, its battery nearly dead. I stood in the doorway, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The trailer was a single room. A small desk was pushed up against the far wall, under a grimy window. A metal filing cabinet stood beside it. A simple cot with a thin, stained mattress was in one corner, and a small kitchenette unit. A sink, a 2-burner hot plate, a mini-fridge, was in the other. It was a space built for one person to work, eat, and sleep. My grandfather's world. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The desk was covered in a thick layer of dust, but underneath it, things were surprisingly orderly. A blotter, a cup full of pens, a heavy-duty stapler. In the center of the desk sat a single object, a shoebox. A plain, cardboard shoebox, the kind that sneakers come in. Unlike everything else, it was clean. There was no dust on it. Someone had placed it here recently, or someone had been wiping it down. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was out of place. This was deliberate. I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, there was no tissue paper, no pair of old shoes. There was just a stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine, and on top of the envelopes, a small, square cassette tape. A label was stuck to it, with a single word written in a shaky but clear hand. Leo. My name. My breath caught in my throat. This was for me. My grandfather had known I would come. He had left this for me. I looked around the trailer, at the cot in the corner, at the single coffee mug by the sink. He lived here. At the end, he lived here, in this little metal box surrounded by his kingdom of rust. He hadn't been some distant, wealthy relative. He'd been a man living a small life in a small space. A life that had ended just weeks ago. I suddenly felt like an intruder. This wasn't just a property, it was a home. His home. I untied the twine around the letters. They were addressed to me in the same shaky hand. They were dated over a period of years, one a year, on my birthday. A birthday he'd never been there for, but a birthday he had marked, year after year, with a letter I'd never received. I picked up the top one. The date was from just a few weeks ago. It was the last one he'd written. My hands were trembling as I opened it. The paper was thin and dry. The letter was short. Leo, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means you're finally 18. Happy birthday, son. I know I've got no right to call you that. I've been a ghost in your life, a story you were probably told to forget. I'm sorry for that. More sorry than you can ever know. There were reasons I couldn't be there, reasons I couldn't fight for you after your dad passed. Karen, she had her own plans. And I didn't have the weapons to fight her kind of war. Not then. I'm leaving you the yard. I know it doesn't look like much. The world sees it as a pile of junk, but it's not. It's a library. Every car here has a story, and some of them have secrets. This place is all I have to give you. It's a home, if you can see it that way, or it's an anchor that will drown you. The choice is yours. The developers want this land. They've been circling for years, like vultures. They'll offer you money, probably enough to feel like a fortune. You can take it. I wouldn't blame you. A clean start is a powerful thing. Or you can stay. You can fight. If you choose to fight, this place will help you. It's not as worthless as it looks. Start with the blue pickup, the '78 Ford, the one with the tree growing in the back, the driver's side door panel. Whatever you decide, know this. I never forgot you. Not for a single day. Your grandpa, Arthur. I read the letter 3 times. My eyes were burning. I wasn't crying, not yet. It was something else, a pressure building behind my eyes, in my chest. He never forgot me. For 10 years, I had believed I was utterly alone, a loose thread cut from the family fabric. I believed no one had thought of me, no one had wanted me. And all that time, an old man in a trailer in the woods had been writing me letters, marking my birthday, waiting for the day I would be free. The cassette tape felt heavy in my hand. I didn't have a tape player. I didn't know what was on it, what his voice would sound like after all these years. I carefully placed the letter and the other envelopes back in the shoebox and put the lid on. The moon had risen, and a pale, silvery light filtered through the grimy window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I needed to find the blue pickup, a '78 Ford, the one with the tree growing in the back. I grabbed the duffel bag, my only link to my old life, and stepped out of the trailer, back into the maze. The chill of the night air was a shock after the stuffy warmth of the trailer. I left the door unlocked. It was my home now, I supposed. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Using the faint moonlight as my guide, I began to walk the rows. The yard was bigger than it looked from the outside. The cars were packed in tight, their metal bodies close enough to touch. I ran my hand along a rusted fender, the metal cold and rough, like the skin of some ancient lizard. Row after row, I searched. I saw Fords and Chevys, Dodges and imports, cars from the 50s and cars from the 90s. They were all in various states of ruin. It was a museum of obsolescence. And then I saw it. In the back corner of the yard, almost hidden by a towering pile of crushed car hoods, was a pale blue pickup truck. It was listing to one side, its tires long since flattened and rotted away, and just as the letter had said, a young but determined-looking sapling was growing right out of the rusted-out truck bed, its thin branches reaching for the sky. It was absurd and beautiful. Life, persisting in a place of death. I walked toward it, my feet sinking into the soft, damp earth. The driver's side door was hanging slightly ajar. I pulled it open with a loud shriek of rusted hinges. The interior was gutted. The seat was just exposed springs and crumbling foam. The dashboard was cracked and faded. The door panel, the letter had said. I looked at the inside of the door. It was covered in a sheet of faded blue vinyl, cracked and peeling at the edges. I ran my fingers along it. It felt loose. I hooked my fingers under the bottom edge and pulled. The vinyl came away with a dry, tearing sound, releasing a puff of dust and mouse droppings. Behind it, there was no treasure chest, no secret compartment. There was just the metal skeleton of the door. And taped to the inside of that skeleton was a thick, waterproof envelope. My fingers fumbled as I tore it loose. It was heavy, too heavy to be just paper. I ripped it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a stack of $100 bills. And another letter. I stumbled back from the truck, my heart hammering against my ribs. I leaned against the fender of a neighboring faceless sedan and slid down to the ground, the damp soil seeping through my jeans. Under the cold light of the moon, in a graveyard of cars, I began to count. The bills were crisp, almost new. They were bound in thick rubber bands, in stacks of $10,000 each. There were 5 stacks. $50,000. I counted it twice, my hands shaking so badly I kept dropping the bills into the dirt. $50,000. In cash. It was an impossible number. It was more than a lifeline. It was a different life. A life where I didn't have to worry about a bed for the night, or a meal, or whether I could afford a new pair of shoes. It was a life I couldn't even properly imagine. My head was spinning. 10,000 from the developers, 50,000 hidden in a door. This place wasn't worthless, it was a treasure chest. I sat there in the mud for a long time, the cash clutched in my hands, my back pressed against a cold, rusted car. The initial shock gave way to a wave of questions. Why hide it? Why not just put it in a bank? Why lead me to it with a cryptic letter? I picked up the second letter that had been in the envelope with the money. It was shorter than the first. Leo, this is your real choice. The 10,000 from the developers is bait. It's a quick out. It's the easy path, and it leads away from here. This money, this is the hard path. It's the seed money. It's what you'll need to pay the back taxes. It's what you'll need to get the power turned back on. It's what you'll need to buy a decent truck and some tools. It's the money to stay. I saved it for years. A little bit here, a little bit there. Every time I sold a catalytic converter for cash, or a rare alternator, or a vintage hubcap to a collector, I put something aside. For you. The developers, Red Oak Holdings, they don't just want this land. They want to erase it. They're buying up this whole valley for a luxury housing development. Pine Creek Estates, or some nonsense. They're bullies. They've been pressuring everyone, pushing people out who have lived here for generations. They offered me more than they're offering you, a lot more. But this place was your dad's dream before it was mine. We were going to run it together, Vance and Son. When he died, and I lost you, keeping this place safe for you was the only thing I had left. It was the only promise I could still keep. If you take their money, you'll be set for a year or two. You'll have a nice apartment and a full belly. And then the money will be gone, and this place will be gone, and the last piece of your father, of me, will be gone too. If you use this money to stay, you'll be poor again in a month. You'll be fighting the county over taxes, fighting the developers in court, fighting the rust and the rot every single day. It will be the hardest thing you've ever done. But you'll have a home. You'll have a business. You'll have something that is yours. I can't make the choice for you. Your father would have wanted you to be safe. I want you to be free. Sometimes those aren't the same thing. Listen to the tape. Please, Arthur. I folded the letter and put it back in the waterproof envelope with the money. The $50,000 felt different now. It wasn't a windfall. It was a burden. It was a responsibility. It was a test. I looked around at the yard, at the hulking shapes of the cars under the moonlight. This wasn't just a collection of junk. It was a legacy. A broken, rusted, difficult legacy. I thought about my life up to this point. A series of rooms that were never mine. A series of faces I was told to call family, who were just paid to be there. A feeling of being temporary, of being in the way. I had nothing. And now, I had this. This disaster. This opportunity. This choice. For a moment, the easy path was so tempting. Take all of it, the 60,000, and disappear. Go somewhere warm. Reinvent myself as someone who hadn't spent his childhood in a file cabinet. No one would blame me. My grandfather had said so himself. But his words echoed in my head. This place was your dad's dream, the last piece of your father. I had so few memories of my dad. They were like faded photographs, blurry and distant. I remembered his laugh. I remembered him teaching me how to skip stones on a lake. And I remembered him standing next to my grandfather, both of them covered in grease, smiling, in a place that looked just like this. This wasn't just about me. It was about them, too. It was about honoring a dream I never knew existed. The anger I'd felt toward my grandfather for his absence began to curdle into something else. Grief. And a profound, aching gratitude. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been guarding something for me. He had spent the last decade of his life as a sentry, protecting this broken piece of land for a boy he wasn't allowed to see. He had fought his war against Karen, not with lawyers, but with patience. He had won by simply outlasting her indifference. I stuffed the envelope of cash deep into my duffel bag, zipping it up tight. I stood up, my legs stiff and cold. I knew what I had to do. I had to find a tape player. I had to hear his voice. But first, I was going to spend the night in my new home. I walked back to the trailer, the weight of the bag on my shoulder, a heavy, reassuring presence. I didn't have a blanket, so I pulled the thin mattress off the cot and put it on the floor, away from the drafty window. I used my jacket as a pillow. It was cold. It was uncomfortable. It was the best night's sleep I'd ever had. I woke up to the sound of a bird singing, a clear, sharp melody that cut through the morning mist. For a second, I didn't know where I was. The gray light, the smell of dust and oil, it was all wrong. Then it came rushing back. The salvage yard, the letter, the money. I sat up, every muscle in my body aching from the cold floor. The duffel bag was right beside me, a lump of black nylon containing an impossible secret. I unzipped it and looked inside. The envelope was still there. It was real. I hadn't dreamed it. The first order of business was the tape. I needed to hear it. That meant I needed a tape player. In 2023, that was like looking for a dinosaur. My grandfather's kingdom of old machines seemed like the most logical place to start. I spent the morning exploring the yard in the daylight. It was less menacing and more melancholy in the sun. I saw the logic of it now. It wasn't just a random pile. The cars were grouped by manufacturer. A row of Fords, a section of GMs, a corner for foreign cars. It was an organized library of parts, just as he'd said. I started searching the cars that were more intact, the ones from the 80s and 90s. I popped open glove compartments, finding dried-up pens, fossilized maps, and empty cigarette packs. I ran my hands under seats, feeling for the familiar shape of a Walkman or a car stereo with a cassette deck. After an hour, I found one. In a beat-up Honda Civic from the late 90s, there was a factory stereo with a tape slot. But there was no power. I needed a battery. I knew next to nothing about cars, but my grandfather's letter had given me a clue. This place would help me. I found a rolling cart near the trailer with a set of tools on it: wrenches, sockets, screwdrivers. They were old and greasy, but they were solid. I found a newer-looking SUV that had been in a front-end collision, but the back half looked okay. I figured the battery might still have a charge. It took me another hour of fumbling, of watching a tutorial I downloaded on my phone before the signal died, but I managed to disconnect the battery. It was heavy and awkward. I lugged it over to the Honda, my arms straining. I figured out how to connect it to the terminals under the Honda's hood, using a set of jumper cables I found in its trunk. It was a long shot. I got back into the driver's seat, the ripped upholstery scratching my back. I took a deep breath and pushed the cassette into the slot. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the stereo whirred to life. A small green light flickered on. It worked. I pressed play. There was a hiss of static, then a sound that made my chest tighten. It was the sound of a man clearing his throat. A voice, rough and gravelly, laced with the wheeze of a lifelong smoker. "Is this thing on? Hope so." It was him. My grandfather. "Leo, if you're hearing this, it means you chose the hard path. Or you're at least thinking about it. Good. I was hoping you would. Your dad, he was a fighter. I think you've got that in you too." His voice was warm, but tired. He sounded like he was smiling. "There's not much time. The doctors say a few weeks. So I'm going to tell you the story, the real one. When your dad died, it broke me. But losing you right after, that was a different kind of breaking. Karen came to me. She said she was putting you in the system. She said you were troubled, that you'd set a fire at the school. I knew it was a lie. You were a good kid, a quiet kid. But she had reports. She had paperwork. She'd been planning it. She made me an offer. She said if I signed away my grandparental rights, if I promised never to contact you, she'd make sure you went to a good place, a private group home. If I fought her, she said she'd drag you through a court battle that would scar you for life. She'd use the money your dad left to hire lawyers who would paint me as an unfit, greasy old junk man, and she'd paint you as a delinquent. She said we'd both lose. I believed her. I was grieving. I was tired. And I was scared for you. So I made a choice. I chose to let you go, to protect you from a fight I didn't think I could win. It was the biggest mistake of my life." He paused, and I could hear him take a ragged breath. The sound of his breathing was the only thing in the car. I signed the papers, and she lied. She didn't send you to a good place. She dropped you at county services and washed her hands of you. By the time I found out, it was too late. The papers were signed. I had no rights. I was a legal stranger to my own grandson. I spent the next 10 years trying to keep track of you. A friend of a friend in the county system would give me updates. Which home you were in, that you were okay. That's all I had. And I saved. I worked this yard from sunup to sundown. I turned this pile of junk into a promise. A promise that when you turned 18, you'd have something to come home to. A place she couldn't touch. A place that was yours. This isn't just about money, Leo. It's about ground. It's about standing on a piece of dirt and saying, "This is mine. You can't take this from me." Red Oak Holdings, they're just a fancier version of Karen. They use money and lawyers to take what they want. Don't let them. The yard can pay for itself if you're smart. There's value here, but not the kind you weigh on a scale. There's a 1967 Mustang coupe in the back row under a green tarp. It was your dad's project car. The engine is in the barn. All the parts are there, labeled in crates. It's worth a fortune if you can put it back together. There are collectors who come looking for vintage chrome, for specific parts. I have a logbook in the filing cabinet. It has all my buyers, all my contacts. It's a roadmap to making this place work. This is your fight now, or it's your chance to walk away. No one will think less of you, but I hope you stay. I hope you finish what your dad and I started. I hope you build a life here, a good one. The tape clicked off. The silence that followed was heavy. I sat in the driver's seat of the dead Honda, tears streaming down my face. I cried for the 8-year-old boy dropped off at a cold county building. I cried for the father I'd lost twice, once to death and once to a story that had been a lie. And I cried for the old man who had lived out his last years in a lonely trailer, holding on to a promise, fighting a silent war for me. The grief was a physical thing, a weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But underneath it, something else was taking root. A cold, hard anger and resolve. Karen hadn't just abandoned me. She had stolen my family. Red Oak Holdings wasn't just a developer. They were trying to bulldoze the last piece of that family. My grandfather had given me a choice, but listening to his voice, hearing the truth, I knew there was no choice at all. This was my ground, and I wasn't giving up a single inch of it. The time for being a victim, for being a file in a cabinet, was over. It was time to fight back. The first step was to stop being a ghost. I packed the $50,000 back into the duffel bag, hid it deep in the cluttered trailer, and walked the 2 miles back to town. My mission was simple. I needed a phone charger, food, and a place to get clean. The town's single gas station had a small convenience store attached. I bought a universal charger, a bottle of water, and a protein bar. The clerk, a teenager who looked bored out of his mind, barely glanced at me. Back at the diner, I ordered coffee and asked the kind-faced owner, whose name I learned was Sarah, if there was a place a person could get a shower. She looked at me, her gaze taking in my muddy clothes and the grime under my fingernails. She didn't ask any questions. "The truck stop on the highway has showers. It's about a 5-mile walk. Or," she said, lowering her voice, "my husband's a volunteer firefighter. The station's just around the corner. The guys use the showers there all the time. No one's there right now. I could give you the code." Her kindness was so unexpected it almost knocked me over. In my life, help always came with paperwork. It came with conditions and evaluations. This was just human. Thank you," I stammered. "I can pay you." "Don't be silly," she said, waving a hand. "Just bring the towel back when you're done." An hour later, I was standing under a stream of blissfully hot water in the clean, sterile bathroom of the Pine Creek Volunteer Fire Department. I washed away the grime of the road, the dust of the salvage yard, and what felt like years of institutional residue. As I scrubbed my skin raw, I felt like I was shedding a former self. The person who walked out of that shower was not the same one who had walked in. Back at the diner, clean and wearing my last set of clean clothes, I plugged my phone into the wall. As it charged, I pulled out the business card for Red Oak Holdings. Mr. Davies. It was time to make a call. I also needed to call the lawyer, Ms. Albright. I'd need her. I decided to start with the developer, get the lay of the land. I stepped outside the diner into the crisp afternoon air and dialed. A smooth, confident voice answered on the second ring. James Davies. Hello, Mr. Davies. My name is Leo Vance. Ah, Mr. Vance. I've been expecting your call, he said. His voice was slick, polished, the kind of voice that was used to getting its way. I assume you've seen the property? My condolences on your grandfather's passing. He was a stubborn man. He was, I said, my hand tightening on the phone. I'm calling about your offer. Excellent. $10,000. A quick, clean sale. We handle all the paperwork, clear the tax lien. You walk away with a check in a few days. For a young man in your position, it's a fantastic opportunity to start fresh. My position? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Well, yes. Starting out on your own. It's a significant amount of seed money. He was talking to me like I was a child, like I was the same boy from the files Karen had created. The offer seems a little low, I said, testing the waters. Davies chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Mr. Vance, let's be frank. The property is a toxic waste dump. The cost of cleanup and clearing the land is astronomical. On top of that, you have a significant tax bill that's about to come due. The county will seize the property in less than 3 months. Our offer of $10,000 is, frankly, generous. It's a gift. If you wait, you'll get nothing. He was trying to scare me. The old me would have been terrified. The old me would have been grateful for the $10,000. But I wasn't the old me. I had $50,000 hidden in a trailer and the voice of my grandfather on a cassette tape. I'm not interested in your gift, I said. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. The slick confidence in his voice evaporated, replaced by a cold edge. I think you're making a mistake, son. That land is part of a multi-million-dollar development project. We have the county board's approval. We have the zoning changes pushed through. Your grandfather was the last holdout. This project is happening, with or without you. You can take the money and walk away, or you can be buried under legal fees and foreclosure notices. The outcome will be the same. He was threatening me. It was the same tactic Karen had used on my grandfather. Bullying. Pressure. The assumption that I was weak and alone. I guess we'll see, I said. My lawyer will be in touch. I hung up before he could respond. My heart was pounding, but it was a thrill, not fear. I had drawn a line in the sand. My next call was to Ms. Albright. I got through to her this time. Her voice was exactly as I'd imagined. Sharp, intelligent, no nonsense. I explained that I had rejected the offer from Red Oak Holdings. Good, she said, without missing a beat. It was a garbage offer. They were trying to rob you. They said they'd bury me in legal fees. Let them try, she said, and I could hear a grim smile in her voice. I've been dealing with Red Oak's lawyers for years on behalf of your grandfather. They're bullies, but they're sloppy. Your grandfather, Arthur, he was a smart man. He filed a series of environmental complaints against their other building sites, documented runoff into the creek, improper disposal of construction materials. He built a fortress of paperwork. They can't get a final permit for the development as long as those complaints are active. That's why they're so desperate to get your land. It's the key to the whole project. My grandfather hadn't just been a junk man. He'd been a general. He told me the yard could pay for itself, I said. He left me instructions, and he left me some money. Enough to pay the back taxes. How much? She asked. $3,400, right? Yes, I have it. Excellent. Bring it to my office tomorrow morning. We'll go to the county clerk and pay it in person. We'll get a receipt. That stops the foreclosure process cold. Then we go on the offensive. Offensive? Red Oak has been operating under the assumption that you're a broke kid they can intimidate. We're going to show them they're wrong. We're going to file a motion to expedite the environmental hearings. We're going to make them spend money. Lots of it. I felt a surge of hope so powerful it almost made me dizzy. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was fighting. And I wasn't alone. Ms. Albright, I said, thank you. Don't thank me yet, Leo, she said, her voice softening for the first time. Your grandfather paid my retainer for the next year before he passed. He said to tell you he was just paying his tab. Now get some sleep. We have a busy day tomorrow. I hung up the phone, the setting sun casting long shadows down the empty street. I had a lawyer. I had a plan. I had a home to fight for. I walked back toward Rustwater Road, but this time, I wasn't just a boy who had inherited a pile of junk. I was Vance and Son, and the business was officially open. The next few weeks were a blur of motion. I felt like I had been asleep for 10 years and had suddenly been jolted awake. There was so much to do, it was overwhelming, but it was a good kind of overwhelming. It was the feeling of building something, not just waiting for something to fall apart. The first victory was paying the taxes. I walked into Ms. Albright's office with a thick envelope of cash. She didn't bat an eye. She just put it in a bank bag, and we walked over to the county courthouse together. She did all the talking, her voice crisp and authoritative. I just stood beside her, a silent partner in my own rescue. The clerk, a woman who looked like she'd been personally wronged by Red Oak Holdings, stamped my receipt with a satisfying thud. The lien was gone. The 90-day clock had stopped. When we walked out of the courthouse, I felt 10 feet tall. Back at the yard, I started the real work. The first thing I did was buy a heavy-duty generator and a portable heater from the hardware store in the county seat. That night, for the first time, the trailer had light and warmth. It was a small thing, but it felt like a monumental achievement. I plugged in a hot plate and made coffee on my own stove. I sat at my grandfather's desk, the shoebox of his letters beside me, and I felt a sense of peace I'd never known. I started to clean. The trailer was my first project. I scrubbed it from top to bottom. I threw out the old, stained mattress and bought a new one, along with blankets and a pillow. I washed the windows, and for the first time, I could see the yard clearly from the desk. It was still a mess, but it was my mess. My grandfather's logbook was exactly where he said it would be, in the top drawer of the filing cabinet. It was a revelation. It wasn't just a list of buyers. It was a detailed inventory of the yard's most valuable assets. He had notes in the margins, detailing which cars held rare or hard-to-find parts. A certain model of carburetor from a 70s muscle car, a specific type of chrome trim from a 50s sedan, a transfer case from a rare 4x4. The yard wasn't just a collection of dead cars. It was a highly specialized library. I spent my days with the logbook in hand, exploring the rows. I learned to identify cars by the shape of their taillights, by the curve of a fender. I learned the difference between a distributor cap and a fuel pump. My hands became permanently stained with grease, just like his had been. I found the green tarp in the back row. Underneath it was the 1967 Mustang. It was a skeleton, its body in primer gray, its interior stripped bare. But it was beautiful. It had the clean, powerful lines of a predator. In the big, barn-like structure at the edge of the property, I found the engine, carefully wrapped in plastic on a stand. And next to it, dozens of crates, each one neatly labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Mustang, dashboard instruments, Mustang, chrome trim, Mustang, electrical wiring. He had disassembled the entire car and saved every single piece. It was a puzzle, waiting to be put back together. One afternoon, a rusty old tow truck rumbled up to the gate. An old man with a long gray beard and kind eyes got out. "You Arthur's boy?" he asked, squinting at me. "Grandson," I said. "Leo?" He nodded. "Name's Gus. I run the garage in town. Your granddad and we did business for 40 years. Heard you were keeping the place on. Figured you could use this." He gestured to the back of his truck, where a beat-up but solid-looking old pickup was chained down. "It's an old ranch truck. Nothing fancy, but the engine's solid. Your granddad ordered some parts for me a few months back. Never got to pay him. Consider this a down payment." He helped me unload it. Before he left, he looked around the yard, a sad smile on his face. "This place. It's the history of this town in metal," he said. "Every car has a story. That old Buick over there belonged to the high school principal for 30 years. That beat-up station wagon? The Millers drove their 6 kids to church in that thing every Sunday. Don't let those corporate vultures pave over our history, son." He was the first of many. People from town started to stop by. Some were just curious. Others came with stories about my grandfather. They told me how he'd helped them find a part to keep an old farm truck running, how he'd given them a break when they were short on cash. I learned that my grandfather hadn't just been a junk man. He'd been a pillar of the community in his own quiet, greasy way. I started making sales. A collector from 2 states over called, looking for a set of hubcaps for a Studebaker. I found them using the logbook, cleaned them up, and shipped them out. The check that came back was for $300. It felt like $1 million. Ms. Albright was true to her word. She filed the motions. Red Oak's lawyers responded with delays and threats, but the pressure was on them now. Their project was stalled, and it was costing them money every day. One evening, I got a call from Mr. Davies. His voice was no longer slick or confident. It was strained. "Mr. Vance, Leo, let's talk man to man. This has gone on long enough. We're prepared to increase our offer." Significantly. I looked out the window of my trailer. The lights from my generator cast a warm glow on the rows of cars. I could see the shape of the Mustang under its tarp. I could see the new truck Gus had brought me. I had a home. I had a business. I had a community. I had a purpose. "It's not for sale," I said. And for the first time, I felt the full weight and power of those words. This is my home. There was a long silence. Then he hung up. I knew it wasn't the end of the fight. But I also knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was going to win. I was no longer a boy who had been given a worthless pile of junk. I was a man who had been given a chance to rebuild a car, a business, and a life. A chance to honor a promise made by a father I barely remembered and a grandfather I had only just found. The fight with Red Oak Holdings dragged on for another year. It was a war of attrition, fought in courtrooms and county board meetings. Albright was a shark, and with the evidence my grandfather had collected, she bled them dry. They were fined for the environmental violations. Their permits were delayed indefinitely. The Pine Creek Estates project collapsed under the weight of its own corruption and a mountain of legal fees. One day, a different kind of letter arrived at the gate. It was from a bankruptcy court. Red Oak Holdings was liquidating its assets. They were gone. I had won. But the victory felt quiet. The real prize wasn't their defeat. It was what I had built while the war was raging. The yard was changing. With the money from parts sales, I started to clean it up. I cleared the weeds, organized the cars, and set up a proper workshop in the barn. I got the power turned back on for real, and the single light bulb in the trailer felt like a beacon. I even got a landline phone installed. The Mustang became my obsession. Every night, after a day of pulling parts for customers, I would work on it. I learned how to read a wiring diagram. I learned how to rebuild a carburetor. I learned the patient, methodical process of bringing something back from the dead. Gus from the garage would come by sometimes, bringing coffee and offering advice. Other locals would stop in, sharing stories about the car, about the day my dad first bought it. The car became a community project. It was a way for them to remember my father and grandfather, and a way for me to know them. The day I finally got the engine to turn over, the roar echoed across the valley. It was a triumphant sound, a declaration of life in the middle of the salvage yard. It felt like my own heart starting to beat again after a long silence. I painted it the original color, a deep midnight blue. It gleamed in the sun, a jewel in a setting of rust. It wasn't just a car, it was a connection. It was proof that something broken could be made whole again. It was my story in steel and chrome. I never became rich. The salvage yard provided a living, but a modest one. It was a life of hard work, of greasy hands and long days. But it was a good life. It was an honest life. I had a home. I had friends. I had a history that I understood, and a future that I was building with my own two hands. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I take out the shoebox. I read my grandfather's letters, and I listen to his voice on that old cassette tape. He gave me more than a piece of land and some hidden money. He gave me back my past, and he gave me a future I never could have imagined. He taught me that the things people call worthless are often the things that matter most. A broken-down car, a rusty piece of land, a boy the world had thrown away. With a little work, a little patience, and a little hope, they can all be salvaged. They can all be saved. This journey, from that institutional doorway to this cluttered, beautiful piece of land, has taught me one profound lesson. Home isn't a place you are given. It's a place you build. It's a place you fight for. It's the ground you choose to make your own. And sometimes, it's hidden in the last place you'd ever think to look. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. I know there are people out there who feel like I did on my 18th birthday, alone, with nothing but a bag of worn-out clothes and a future that looks like a long, empty road. Maybe you were told you were worthless. Maybe you were handed a situation that seemed hopeless. I want you to know you're not alone. The story doesn't have to end there. I read all the comments, and this community we're building here is for people like us. People who know what it's like to start from nothing. So if this story meant something to you, please hit that subscribe button. And in the comments below, I want you to tell me, what is one worthless thing in your life that turned out to be a treasure? It could be a piece of advice, a person someone else overlooked, or a second chance that looked like a dead end. Let's fill the comments with stories of salvage and redemption. Let's show the world that nothing and no one is ever truly worthless. Thank you for being a part of this.